This is Rob Kilmer. Everyone out there is telling you what to think. I say figure it out yourself. That's what we're talking about this week on You Defend It. Welcome to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 772-1290. As always, callers to the show will need to take a position, be able to defend it, with an argument that is factual, not emotional. And if you can't make your point without insulting someone, you can't make your point on this show. For my part, I will ask questions that matter and give people the opportunity to answer. And all my callers and guests will be treated with complete respect. My website is www.youdefendit.com. That's youdefendit.com. You can give me your comments on the show anytime. By Friday of each week, I will have the topics up for the next show. You can also visit my blog through the site. You can read my posts and leave your own. The lineup for Sunday talk shows will also be posted there on Saturdays if they are posted online somewhere for me to get them by then. You can always listen to my show live on streaming audio on www.wnbf.com, and my show is then uploaded to youdefendit.com later on Saturdays. Finally, there is a new debate suggestions section. It is at the top of the home page. Leave me your thoughts on topics, debaters, and questions. Okay. This week we are going to talk about the benefits of thinking for yourself as opposed to taking direction from the people who you are subjected to on a daily basis on cable and talk radio. And we'll also, at the end of the show, I'll give you an update on the debates. But, you know, in the last week or so, particularly with respect to the nomination of Judge Sotomayor to the Supreme Court to fill the vacancy of Justice Souter, the amount of ridiculous, and that's too gentle a word, vicious things that have been said about her, and the way that the issues themselves have been cast and framed by both sides. It's a disservice to everybody. The practice of listening to cable and talk radio is really just the process of voluntarily limiting your options. It is the home of false choices, exactly two views on the world. It is where new ideas go to die. Occasionally you'll hear a third way discussed on talk radio or on cable, but usually it's being denigrated at the time. I say this, there's a third way, there's a fourth way, there's a fifth, there's a 50th. This notion that the two major parties have captured all of the good ideas is not really supportable by the facts that are out there. If they've got all the answers, then how can things be so bad in so many areas? They've each had a crack at it by now. Figure it out for yourself. Take the same approach to national issues that you take in your everyday life. Selfishly hoard information. Don't rely on people who make money by making you think a certain way or attempting to influence you to think a certain way. Why play into that? Don't bother with it. You got something you care about, get as much information from as many different sources as possible and get on with it. That's why my debates are being run in the manner of oral argument. At oral argument, you may have two sides. You may have 3 or 4 different lawyers from different perspectives. You may have one lawyer with 5 different arguments. The process of oral argument before a court is the process of getting as much information through the door and to that judge as possible. Because that judge is going to make a decision. The people who are out there now, the people on cable, the people who are on talk radio, they never have to make a decision. Never. Accordingly, they don't have to live with consequences. Ever. They comment on consequences. They comment on issues. Beyond that, they offer nothing. They're not accountable, other than financially. And the way they make the grade financially is to get as many people as emotionally involved in an issue as possible. That's how it works. Leave them out. Think about this. Somebody who's on the air 3 hours a day, Monday through Friday. I don't care which side. When do they have the time to learn the issue? I mean, they talk about 10, 15 issues a week. When do they learn them? It isn't show prep, which is essentially gathering up inflammatory material or taking otherwise innocuous material and making it inflammatory and then presenting it in a certain way later that day. When do they become experts on anything? Think about that. The people who you hear, the people who you see, telling you what to think, what do they know? They are not purveyors of fact. They are purveyors of opinion. But where do the facts come from that form the basis of the opinion? They're not out learning them. When could they? Why take direction from somebody who doesn't really know much, other than how to get you fearful and angry? That's what they're good at. Really good at. I say, treat yourself better. Treat yourself much better. Take information from all sources. Make up your own mind. There's more than one way. There are lots of them. We will be right back. You are listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio 1290 WNBF Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 772-1290. I want to touch just a little bit on the remarks that have been made thus far about Judge Sotomayor. I don't know much about her, and the purpose of this is not to endorse her or to criticize her. I don't know enough about her. But I will say this. There have been many times on this show where I have talked about the criticism of the judiciary. And what I have tried to do when I could, which was almost every time, was take whatever issue was out there that week, any decision that either side was complaining about, I would get the decision and read it here. You are hearing right now pieces of speeches that she made, or remarks at a forum, remarks she made at a forum, or summaries of decisions that she was a part of the majority in, you never get the complete picture. You never get the other remarks she made at the forum. You don't get context. I've heard about a decision, a reverse discrimination case, which the Supreme Court is currently considering. You hear, in general terms, the outcome of the case when it was before her. And by the way, she's a judge for the Circuit Court of Appeals. Was she a threat to our country the last several years? She was originally nominated to the trial court bench by the first President Bush. President Clinton nominated her to an appeals court seat. Where has the threat been? Where's the evidence that she's done anything since this 2001 remark that she made? That's 8 years ago. She's been participating in decisions for years since then. Written. The best kind. I mean, it's not hard to find her record. It's written. It's literally black and white. If you want to find facts about how she will act on the bench, the beauty of nominating a sitting judge, particularly one who's been sitting as long as she has, it's all right there. Go find it. Where is the decision she wrote? Where are her words that somehow depict racism on her part or something of that nature? Ask yourself that. We don't have to, this isn't a theoretical, you don't have to look at her nomination in the abstract. It's there. She's been on a writing spree for years. It's all right there. Let's talk about that. I don't know what it is. But for me, that's the appropriate place to look to how she will act as a judge. In other words, how she's acted as a judge. That seems reasonable to me. That seems logical. And far better than taking a comment she made at a forum where I believe she also made the comment that it was 9 white men who overturned or who issued Brown versus Board of Education. No more separate but equal. Look at her writings as a judge, and you might get some insight into her opinions as a judge. I say that's a better way to go. At the end of the day, if she sits on the Supreme Court, we're going to be bound as Americans by what she writes. That will reflect her thinking. We're not going to be bound by remarks she makes anywhere. Whether what we've heard so far is out of context or in context. We're going to be bound by decisions issued by that court. That's it. So let's look to the relevant stuff. The decisions she's written so far. That's where you go. It's a better indicator. And I don't know anything about her decisions. I haven't read one. But that's where I'm going to look. Now, one of the things I wanted to get to this morning was, would you treat your kids the way you allow yourself to be treated by cable? What do you do with your kids? What do you want them to do? You want them to make good decisions. I think you could make the argument that that's what parenting is. Ultimately, teaching your children to make good decisions. Do you want to narrow the amount of information that they get? No. In fact, you teach your kids not to react emotionally. You teach your kids to listen. You teach your kids to consider things. Yet, as adults, there is an entire and successful industry dedicated to limiting information, dedicated to playing on your emotions and nothing else. You know, where did we forget that lesson? Where did we forget that we're entitled to more than that? If we want to be. It's up to us. On days when we talk about a specific issue on this show, I will try and find as many diverse references as I can. As you know, the format for this show, whenever we're talking about something more specific, is I take it and I do my best to explain it during the first part of the show. And I will go to what would be considered liberal, what would be considered conservative. I have directed people, listeners to this show, to conservative columns that I loved and liberal columns that I loved. I try and remember to say so-called liberal and conservative, because I don't believe there are any conservatives or liberals out there. Not pure ones. I don't know any of them. I've never met one. I've never met a person who is completely liberal or completely conservative. Because life isn't like that. It doesn't present itself that way, that it can be defined that way. So people don't live their lives using those rigid perspectives. They can't. Life doesn't present itself in a format where that's useful. But I am amazed, as even just in the last week or so, the amount of, not just, remarks to be made. You had Tom Tancredo, a Texas representative, refer to the largest Hispanic civil rights group in America as the KKK without hoods. Coming from Tom Tancredo, that doesn't surprise me a heck of a lot. But where are the repudiations? Where's the denunciation? That's what I don't get. You know, when you start throwing around this charge of racism, which has happened, I think, with Rush Limbaugh, Newt Gingrich, and Tancredo, I understand, particularly from, when you get narrow conservative districts through gerrymandering. I'm sure that Tom Tancredo's remarks were well received where he lives. I don't think he has put his seat in jeopardy by saying that. Newt Gingrich has nothing to lose. He doesn't have a seat. Rush Limbaugh has everything to gain by making these remarks. There's money in it. But where is everybody else? To his credit, I will say that Senator Kyle, he did denounce those remarks to some extent. But where's the rest of it? Have you heard from anybody but me that you should consider judging the judge on what she's done as a judge? Does that not seem logical to you? I mean, my understanding is that she is in the position right now as nominee for the Supreme Court of having been on the bench in different capacities as a trial court judge and an appeals court judge more than any prior nominee in the last 100 years, which means there's a paper trail 50 miles long. Read it. That's where you're going to get your best information on how she'll be as a judge. by taking a hard look at how she's been as judge. What better way is there? But there's no emphasis on that because it's kind of dry. But we have important issues that this country is facing, as always. And we need serious people to engage in serious discussion about the issues. You can't get it from a soundbite. You know, I remember the Rodney King trial, the very first trial. After that horrible videotape beating, and the officers initially in state court were acquitted. And there was an interview of a juror. And I remember him saying, I realize that people have seen this 20-second video a million times, but the trial was 6 weeks long. There was a lot more information there. Now, I'm not saying one way or the other on I'm sure it was 6 weeks long, but it's hard to overcome the imagery of that beating. But the point that I'm making is, get as much information as you can. You don't get it all from sound bites. You get nothing. You get a calculated remark designed to elicit an opinion or a reaction from you, an emotional reaction. You owe it to yourself to get the rest. We're going to take a break here at 8:30 for news, and we'll be back after that. You are listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio 1290 WNBF Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 772-1290. You know, during the week, if I'm driving, I will listen to Colin Cowherd on 1360, a sister station here, a shameless plug on my part, ESPN, not because of sports, even though it's a sports talk show. That guy gives more insight into more different things that I listen to him for that. I listen to Car Talk on Saturday mornings because those guys are hilarious. That's on NPR. But all it is questions about cars and two funny guys answering them. But you can also learn a lot listening to them. And Colin Cowherd in particular, there's just something about that guy. He is willing and very much able to tell the truth about issues. He cuts right through all of it and says, this is why we do what we do. He explains how the industry works, the sports industry, in terms of how Americans, how fans act and what they really want, and how the successful franchises provide it. But not in terms that you would hear the teams themselves say or utter. You get more from him about life in general and about American life in general than you get, in my experience, on any other sports station, listening to any other talk show. And I look forward to listening to him because I'm going to learn something. And that's all I want to do. I want to know as much as I can before I make a decision. Now, a decision in the context of this show is really a vote. They're after your vote. And they get it by working you into a state of such anger and fear that you come out on one side or the other. But there are more than just the two sides. There are hundreds. Crisis usually brings to the surface the other sides. Nobody would have thought a year ago that GM would be going into bankruptcy, and that's where they're going Monday. Nobody would have thought that what happened to Chrysler would happen, or Lehman Brothers. Those did not seem like options. But crises make you consider a lot of things that you didn't consider before. Something beyond the two options that are fed to you by the right and the left. We've talked recently on this show about California. They're going to cut taxes, or they're going to raise taxes, they're going to cut spending. A perfect blend of what both sides have been advocating. I'll get to your phone calls in a minute. I just want to finish this point. What both sides have been advocating for forever. But nobody wants that. People want, they have been kind of, enticed into a pure choice. You either cut taxes or raise taxes or cut spending. That's how you eliminate debt. Well, clearly a third way is to do both. And there are other ways as well. But it's not as if there are just the two ways to solve these problems. And what you're seeing in California and what you're seeing in New York. Patterson he's about as popular as the flu in New York. And from the beginning, he has advocated different ways to resolve our state's budget problems. But he has offended everybody by affecting everybody. So, that being the case, there's no movement. So now he's said he'll do it himself. He'll just veto anything that comes to his desk that doesn't lower spending. We'll see what happens with him. I got John on the line from Endicott. You there?
Yes, I am, Rob.
Thanks for calling in.
Okay. You're going to have to excuse me a little bit. I'm a little bit nervous.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I'm calling. I am taking a position, and that is that there should be concern, a legitimate concern about Sotomayor.
Okay.
And I think there's a lot of statistical information that's being really deceptive.
Okay.
The people have brought up that she's been overturned, I believe, 4 out of 6 times. And no one knows what the outcome of this recent review is going to be. But it seems all the experts are saying it's almost certainly to be overturned, which will be 5 out of 7. Okay? That is really not a good average. But then people say that's misleading because she wrote 234 opinions. And 6 out of 234 is not bad. But the court did not review all 234. Okay, the Supreme Court gets thousands of appeals, and they say more of them are worth hearing, but it's impossible to review them all. So when you say they did review 7 of her cases and are overturning what might be 5 out of 7, that is really not good.
Well, let me say this. I think that I don't know about any of the numbers you're using. I haven't seen them anywhere. But
these
your
are
point.
On the computer. These are on. I got these off the legal channels.
Okay. Well, but my point is that That's an excellent point you make. You may hear one side say 5 out of 7 of her decisions have been, that is exactly how the conversation should go, John, I think, the way you presented it. You will hear one side say 5 out of her 7 decisions have been overturned, without mentioning the fact that there are hundreds of others that weren't overturned. The other side will say that's 5 out of 260 that she's written. And then the real critical issue is how many have been reviewed. That is exactly, in my mind, the way that should be presented. If those numbers are accurate, then that's a pretty logical presentation of that issue, in my opinion. And if 5 out of 7 of her opinions have been overturned, you would need, I would think, to know what they were and why they were overturned and who overturned them. I mean, some people, we didn't have a very conservative, we had Sandra Day O'Connor on the court until just a few years ago. If her opinions were overturned, if they were conservative opinions, overturned by what might be deemed the liberal wing of the United States Supreme Court, that would mean something. I did read that out of 45 discrimination cases that came to her, they threw out 42. She did. I want to see it all. But, that to me, that is a fascinating way that you present that.
See, the other
People don't realize that the Supreme Court does not review every decision. They review a tiny fraction of them. That's an excellent point.
I have a second point, too, about the
Well, you've got a high standard to meet now, John. You made an excellent first point.
Okay, but the misleading of statistics, because the comeback to the 5 out of 7 was that, well, if you look over the amount of reversals from the Supreme Court, that's normal. So she's not, that doesn't make her an exception to the rule. That is disingenuous.
Why?
Because you'll have some, you have to remember, well, I don't have to tell you, you're a lawyer, I'm not, that these circuit courts have up to 29 judges on them, and they don't all usually sit. They'll sit in panels of 3. Now, you do have, as a matter of fact, judges that have sat on a circuit court longer than she has and never had a reversal. So to take a composite 60% and say, well, that breaks down to each individual, that is just lying with statistics.
Well, and the other thing is that the Supreme Court, it's not random that they review a case. They choose which cases they want to review, and that reflects the Supreme Court's ideology.
But they do it by priority. It's not that the cases they don't review are not worth reviewing. The Supreme Court admits it themselves. It's just that they can only handle so much, so they have this priority.
Well, and they choose which ones they want to hear. I mean, believe me, they get certain issues before them intentionally.
Well, that's what I mean. They choose according to priorities.
Right.
All right. They set their own priorities. So I think that right there, I don't think that's really a good argument.
Which? The number of cases before the Supreme Court?
What I mean is not your point. I mean the inference people are making that if the Supreme Court doesn't hear a case, it's not worth reviewing.
No, it's a matter of time.
It's a matter of court limitation.
Right. I agree.
But I really do think that, what bothers me is when you go back and you compare her with Bork. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, Bork was submarined by... Now, I watched those whole hearings, and then I went back and I read that the American cyanamide case,
mm-hmm.
where they said they would not sit a court who believed in forced sterilization.
Okay.
That was never an issue when you read the case.
Isn't it fascinating when you actually read the case versus what you hear about it?
That's right. And I'm saying to myself, wait a minute, this guy, what he did was just give, something now nominees won't do, ever since that, I don't know if you want to call it a lynching, like Thomas said, but they asked him a direct question on one of the most volatile cases in the last 60,
Who, Bork, they asked the question to?
Well, yeah, about
Okay.
his judicial opinion on Roe v. Wade. And he said what the staff of... to put Roe v. Wade into context, it was nicknamed Harry's Abortion. That name did not come from any anti-abortion group. That came from the staff of the Supreme Court itself. After the decision was written, it cannot be defended either legally or logically.
Well, it was written by Harry Blackman. And
Harry Blackman, yeah.
Right.
And Harry Blackman's comments away from the court showed that it was his personal ideology that abortion should be legal. And even Sandra Day O'Connor, in Casey versus Planned Parenthood, she said that there was nothing in the Constitution that supported that decision, but she applied stare decisis, that it was more important for the court to be consistent. Now, I don't buy that from a Supreme Court judge. Stare decisis has become so abused.
Well, to me, there is something to there being some consistency or continuity, like this.
Absolutely.
This Supreme Court decision recently, this Heller decision on guns in Washington, D.C. You have the first significant Second Amendment case in probably 70 years before the Supreme Court. They decide that it's an individual right, which was the issue, and then they say, however, this does not mean that certain municipalities cannot impose reasonable restrictions. They punted. They left it as unclear as it was before they decided the case. What's changed since then? What laws have fallen by the wayside as a result of that decision? All gun laws? Wouldn't you expect that if it was an inalienable right to keep and to possess a firearm, that most of the gun laws, the handgun laws out there, would have been repealed by now almost automatically? Nothing has happened.
Well, I agree with you. On that case, you're absolutely right.
If you're going to make a decision, then make it. Give us some idea of how things are to be.
I agree with you 100%.
People talk about endless litigation, generally blaming the lawyers. Well, all that case did was say, it just shifted the argument. All right, it's an individual right. Fine. However, the Supreme Court said that certain restrictions are reasonable or can be reasonable. Now all we're doing is arguing about whether or not the restrictions are reasonable. It didn't end the debate at all. It just moved it a little bit to the right.
Well, I agree with you absolutely on that point. That's the way I felt about Heller. They punted.
I would rather have a decision, a definitive decision I don't like, than a murky decision that I think I don't like. I want to know. And it's their job to tell us how it's going to be. What the law is, that's the job of the Supreme Court. Actually, I got to let you go,
okay.
John. Hey, I appreciate you calling in, and I hope you'll call in again.
Okay, I probably will.
All right.
I listen to you every Saturday.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Okay, I got to go to a commercial here, but what a great way to present an argument. You know, you learn more listening to John than you've learned from me in the 50 minutes until now. That was, in my view, exactly the way an argument should be discussed. It was all about facts and how you need to be leery of even the facts, but let's look into them. Okay, X amount of cases have been overturned, but what does that mean in the broader sense? Does that mean that she is any different than anybody else? You got to look into it a little further. Do it. I'm gonna. I thought that was a really well put together call from John, who I think he just claimed to be nervous. I think he's called other places before. He did a pretty good job. All right, we'll be back. You were listening to You Defend It right here on News Radio 1290 WMBF Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. I want to give you an update on the debates. I am in the process of lining up the second debater, and then we will go 100 miles an hour and get it filmed. I was in Washington this week, Tuesday and Wednesday. I have my person on the right lined up, Kurt Levy. I think I'm close on the other side. Hopefully next Saturday I can announce a date and get on with it. It still looks like early July or late June. I want to get this underway before the hearings start for Judge Sotomayor. My advantage here is also my disadvantage. I have a great issue that just happened to come up for this pilot, which was, obviously, the vacancy created by Justice Souter's retirement. However, the problem is that it's such a hot issue that the people who are perfect for this pilot on this issue are up to their necks in this issue. That is proving to be a challenge, but it's workable. And I will say this, the people who I have had either email or phone contact with have been amazing about it, even the ones who have declined for scheduling reasons. I get the same thing from everybody. I've talked to, either again by phone or email, people who were thought to be on Obama's list for the nomination. They all say they want to see this happen, or they think this is a good idea. To do it this way. To get a debate out there that prioritizes substance over style. Where you got to defend your position. No complaining about the other side. No giving your opinion of the other side's faults. The judge will explore the weaknesses. The judge who presides over our debates. Everyone I've spoken to, it's been universal, and certain people, in particular, Dean Chemerinsky from UC Irvine, who had originally said he thought he could do it, and then as we got deeper into it, realized that from a scheduling standpoint, he could not do it. He is literally starting a law school this fall. But I cannot express my gratitude to him enough. I mean, he keeps emailing me with names, and I contact the people, and they get back to me, and we try and work it out, and if we can, we can, and if we can't, we can't. So far it's been can't. But I have not had an experience yet where somebody has not gotten back to me and where I have not gotten an answer. The answer so far has been no for scheduling reasons. But I get lengthy emails. These are not forms that I get where they say thanks but no thanks. These are lengthy emails about this is a good idea. Get somebody to do it. You know, here are some names. And these are people who are suggesting colleagues of theirs without really notifying their colleagues ahead of time, I've noticed. But the reaction to this has been completely positive, and that's been a good thing. It's easy to keep moving on this, first of all because I believe I'm right about it. I don't care how long this takes. If I have to do this in August, I'll do it, or September, or after then, whenever. I'm not going anywhere. The need for this idea isn't going anywhere. I'll do it when I have to. But I want to do it sooner rather than later. And I guess the way that this has been embraced by people who I don't know but know enough about to respect, people who have made names for themselves, good names, in the legal profession over a period of decades, you know, that is encouraging to me. This has been received well, and I think other people will also. I do believe this is an idea whose time has come, and I think it will become the standard. What else could it be? For people who care about the issues, for people who want the information, for people who are tired of the noise and the, back and forth hate fest. that is cable and talk radio anymore. Which, by the way, is the overwhelming majority of Americans. They want answers. They don't want questions. They want answers. And this is the exact format to get those answers out to them. Show up ready to defend your position. We'll have a polite, civil, but purely substantive. Nothing but facts. We're going to flesh out arguments. We're going to dispense with talking points. We're going to get on with it. I've said to hundreds of people by this point, we are going to produce debates that are worthy of the issues being discussed and the Americans whose lives are affected by them. They're coming. I am one name away from announcing the date of the first one, and I hope to do that next Saturday. In the meantime, thanks for listening to You Defend It. Please visit my website, youdefendit.com, to give me your comments and suggestions and see topics for next week's show. I am Rob Kilmer. We will see you next week.